slideshow, so I apologize for that they are given to you separately. But these links are available to you on the same page that you found this video. So the first link is the video on thalidomide. So if you could go pause this lecture now and go watch that video, we will talk about it. Okay, so if you went and watched the thalidomide video, it's pretty shocking, right? It's pretty shocking how poor the science was that led to the approval of thalidomide in other countries. And it's also really a testament to the doctor at the FDA who was very dedicated to scientific processes, right? And very dedicated to the idea of making sure that the drug went through the correct experimental processes to prove that it was safe when other approving agencies in other countries wouldn't do that. So like, I think that we sometimes forget that that our regulatory processes, so how the FDA regulates drugs and how the EPA regulates what goes into our environment, is a critical part of how we stay safe. And thalidomide is a really, really good example of that. So when you hear politicians talking about deregulating these agencies, it's really something worth thinking about. So the question is, if there had been proper controls and control groups for thalidomide when it was being developed, what would have happened with it? And the answer to that is that it would have been approved, right? So there are lots of really good uses for thalidomide, for sure. You saw those in the video, but we also learned how dangerous it can be when used in the wrong population. So there are lots of drugs that fall into that category. There are some drugs that fall into the category of teratogens, which is and what thalidomide is. It causes harm to an unborn child. And we still use them. We just use them with protections in place, guardrails, right? So, like for example, the current use of thalidomide is in women only for women who are on birth control or past childbearing age or for some other reason literally cannot become pregnant. And like that, it is definitely possible to put up those guardrails, right? And we would probably have had these therapeutic beneficial effects of thalidomide decades earlier if we had if the original drug maker had done the right thing in how they went through their approval processes. Okay, next example. So I just want to talk for just like 1 second about natural experiments. So some things are natural experiments, which means that they were not set up. They just happened. And here's two really good examples of natural experiments. The Dutch famine, actually, we're going to talk about, pardon me, in 2 weeks, when we talk about epigenetics. But it's a really interesting natural experiment case. And the Great Smoky Mountains study in the 1990s really puts a very fine point on the idea of social determinants of health. Okay, so that's a phrase that you hear sometimes. And what it basically means is, the social environment that we live in, the privileges that we have, the financial situation that we have, those sorts of things really have a determinative effect on our health. And this is a really good example of that. Um, I bring up natural experiments in this context because I just want to underline that we can have um, scientific conclusions from situations that unfolded naturally, or at least in an unplanned manner. And, I told you on a previous slide that you need a control group so that you will know what is the result of the changes in the experiment, and what is just the course of natural unfolding. And obviously, you cannot pick a control group for these situations because you're not setting up the experiment, but there are multiple ways to compare the experimental group with other groups that are equivalent. And, there's some really cool statistical techniques that you can use to do that. Some of these are discussed in your book and some of them aren't, but I named a few of them so that, you could go and look that through if you want to do that. So, um, kind of moving off of what went wrong with thalidomide, you know, there are now institutional review boards which look at um, basically they create standards and uphold standards for research that uses human participants. And those standards were created in response to really a series of experiments that caused a lot of harm to human participants. And these 6 principles are the things that came out of that. And so this is what's in place now. But before that, we had a few notable experiments that just really went wrong. So let's talk about those. So, link two is Stanley Milgram. It's actually a video of Phillips and Bardo talking about Stanley Milgram. And if you know anything about Phillips and Bardo, he conducted the Stanford Prison Experiment. And the Stanford Prison Experiment went so badly wrong and caused so much harm to its human participants that um, he stopped it early. And so Phillips and Bardo is in a unique position to speak to the ethical challenges, we should say, around working with human participants and kind of pushing them to their limits and sort of beyond the point of ethics. So go and watch that video now and then come back to the lecture. So those principles that you saw in the previous slide, Milgram is an indirect driving force behind some of those principles. But he certainly wasn't the only driving force, and he certainly wasn't the straw that broke the camel's back. That's the next slide. Um, but I just want to point out that Milgram's experiment, as disturbing as it was, there was some very valuable data that came from that experiment, and data that we still rely on today in some circumstances. But, you know, it begs the question, of course, is this worth it? Right? Is it, he caused a lot of psychological harm to the subjects in his experiment, but the data has also done a lot of good in the world, and you have to decide for yourself whether you think that that price is worth what we got for it. Okay, link 3. This is the last thing we're gonna do today. This one Um, this one really was the straw that broke the camel's back that took us to um the the institutional review boards and all those standards around using human subjects. Um, I really encourage you to take good notes on this video, because it's very likely to appear on some type of exam or a quiz or something like that in the future. Okay, so go watch that video now, please. All right. So, that was a lot to think about that video. I really, I really want you to think about why it's important. And it's not just around why it's important in terms of, creating ethical standards, but also think about the mistrust in the African American community around working with doctors and researchers. And, this is a very well documented phenomenon. And, now that you know about the Tuskegee syphilis study, is that any surprise, And so what that really brings us back to is the generational transmission of injustice, right? And bias and how that gets passed down and continues to impact not just the research in the field, but also our involvement in the field. So it's worth thinking through. So that's it for this week. If you have questions, please come to office hours. That the hours sometimes change, but they're always going to be in City Zoom accurately. You can send me an email. You can send me a message through Canvas. I'm always here to support you. So thanks, and I hope to speak soon.